Hello and welcome back to AI Ramblings episode. Neil, what's our number?
21.
My God, we are an odd number. We're the odd couple, Gen Z, and I guess Boomer. I might as well admit it. Anyway, we're back, and again, another crazy, busy week on AI stuff. And we can't wait to kind of go through some of it with you all. So thank you for joining us. In terms of our news of the week, number one that popped out to me, Neil, was that, we've talked a lot about how, people are so concerned that AI is going to break the internet, that advertising is going to be fundamentally changed, all through how AI browsing is going to basically change things around, etc. And this week we had some update numbers on how advertising is upending AI search. And we've known this, but we're starting to see some metrics around this. I wrote a post about it. There was a couple of links on this, which we will have in the show notes. So you can take a look. So this business of AI upending search ads and also potentially accelerating it for the better, because Google continues to repeat that they're seeing a pickup on AI related ads as they roll out Gemini, etc. We're seeing similar movement from Meta, which is the other big AI ad dependent company. So it's an important trend. And so this I thought was an important news item to highlight for the week. The other one, Meta a few weeks ago, we all know how it totally accelerated this AI talent war, hundreds of millions of dollars for AI researchers. And it's kind of shaken things up in the US where all the companies are responding to each other to the benefit of AI researchers coming from universities, et cetera. But there is an impact of that on universities themselves. And so there was an interesting set of data and articles, again, in the show notes, of how there is a little bit of a cage match going on between commercial companies and universities who are trying to keep and grow AI researchers. And in the meantime, the VCs and the companies are coming in and just grabbing them by the bucketful and offering them lots of money to do startups or join Google or Meta or Microsoft or whatever. And that is creating a short-term concern around the industry eating its seed corn, as it were, because if we don't have the AI researchers, we're not going to have the future, more experienced researchers as well. And this, by the way, is a mirror image of another issue that we can talk about on a subsequent show, which is something that you're feeling it, which and we've seen constantly a lot of articles on young people today coming out of master's programs, undergrad programs, computer science especially. It's a slower market for jobs, and there too, I think the industry is kind of eating its seed corn by promoting experienced executives and people up and down, but they're neglecting the notion that they have to also grow the younger generation. So just as a aside, I was at a Goldman alumni event recently. When I joined the firm, we were 2,200 people. We're now over 63,000 people worldwide. I was the first Indian to join Goldman in '82 when the whole firm was 2,200 people. Now we've got 5,000 people in Dallas and 10,000 in India. My point
Wow.
is they made the senior partner, John Waldron, who's the president of Goldman Sachs today, was up there and he said, we are as aggressively hiring people from everywhere. One of the reasons they built up the Dallas office is they want to hire not just from the Harvards and the Ivy Leagues, but they want to hire much more broadly, et cetera. And I felt, good about that they're, Goldman, it's over 160 years old. They're still focusing on this business of growing people, the long-term culture, et cetera. And that's a good thing in general. And I think it's a important kind of an underline to the broader tech industry that they need to also be mindful of this. And I think it'll get rebalanced at some point. But this business of companies not hiring younger people and universities not being able to keep younger people is an important one. So it's an important news item of the week I wanted to highlight. One element that is also in there is that the researchers, AI researchers at universities, one of the things they're moving actually to businesses is because they're being promised compute. Today, AI, you can't do any kind of meaningful research without a lot of compute. And the compute, when the average NVIDIA chip costs $30,000 and it's billions of dollars to build data centers, they're kind of priced out. So that's an additional dynamic, which, will hopefully ebb and flow with time. So that was an important second news item of the week. I'll just go through the other two, and then we can the other one, and then we can jump in on the discussion on this. And the third one was both OpenAI and Anthropic actually put out a flashlight on their user base around the world and what they're doing, where they're coming from, etc. And that was very interesting. OpenAI in particular, and I had a post on this as well, which you can look in the show notes. OpenAI specifically was interesting because number one, they found more of their users were women than men, so that was interesting. Number two, that they boast 700 million people using ChatGPT on a weekly basis, and they're finding the people in general across all the demographics are using ChatGPT more for personal than work. So just an interesting metric. And third, as we would expect, younger people are using ChatGPT and things more than the older people, and that's one of the fundamental things we started AI Ramblings on. Our first one or two episodes are on that, so that was interesting. So those are the three kind of big news items of the week. And then on the major topics, we're going to go into Google's YouTube, which is now 20 years old, had its fourth annual event, kind of giving their trends and so on. And that was, I think, an interesting thing to talk about because it's a huge cultural shift in terms of how Hollywood works, how people consume video content, etc. Besides TikTok, which, by the way, it looks like there's a deal getting amended on that. We'll talk about it in a future show. So on the video side, it's a very important development. So those were the rough news and major topics they wanted to talk today.
Yeah, I mean, touching on the second point you made about this trend that's occurring where a lot of university doctoral graduates are kind of being poached now by a lot of these AI companies. Coming from UT Austin being my alma mater, a school that's heavily focused on research efforts, especially in the last couple of years. I remember when we were in the computer engineering department, even as undergraduates, we'd have access to some of the compute, some of the Linux machines and the supercomputer, but even that stuff now is not going to cut it. I mean, there's so much infrastructure that needs to be done, so much investment that needs to go into this. And it's something that I've been trying to track to see if there have been any movements. As of now, no, but it's not only in the area of compute and infrastructure that students have access to, but it's also in the curriculum as well, which is something that I'm maybe a little bit more interested in just because of the program I went through was a bottom up one. So you started with very low level assembly code and then you worked your way up to, complex everyday programming languages. And I think even things like that are going to have to adapt and change over time just to accommodate the fast moving trends. I mean, the reality of it is that there's always going to be a lag between what's happening in industry and what's happening in academia. That's just the way things are, and probably the way things should be, just to make sure what's being taught is what's actually being implemented in the real world. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that because it is something I guess that's near and dear and on my mind just because I just recently graduated. And then yeah, it is interesting that OpenAI and Anthropic released these numbers. Again, not too many big surprises on some of the trends that we saw, but it's another use in which a lot of these companies are trying to be a bit more transparent with the users. Obviously, OpenAI and Sam putting out a couple statements this week as to the content that's going to be shown to teenagers, with there being some mental health signals in the past couple of weeks. They're going to try and put down some more guardrails, it seems, which is probably the safe thing to do in this case. And yeah, it's just another thing we're going to have to keep our eyes on moving forward.
No, and that last item you mentioned is, I mean, the companies are being proactive, but they're also being reactive because in DC this week, there's hearings on AI and kids and so on. So there's a little bit of that as well. There also is an ongoing issue about age verification, which is an issue for the tech industry in general. In general, they would rather not have those restrictions than have them. Even Apple lobbying, Tim Cook called the governor of Texas to alleviate that and so on. And there are, burdens on that technically and economically, not for an Apple, but much, of the industry, smaller companies, etc., have an issue on that front. So there is a balancing that needs to be done on that. But in general, I would agree that these are all kind of steps in the right direction. And the industry, just coming back to the research compute aspect of it, all the major companies are working with universities, providing additional bandwidth of their compute, but there probably needs to be more of that action, again, to grow the seed corn, as it were. And I'm very fixated on that idea. So I think very important kind of general industry-wide developments on the news this week. And that kind of leads us to the YouTube event as well with Neil Mohan, a namesake. By the way, he
Yeah,
spells Neil just the same way as our Neil
the
here
right
does,
way,
Neal, the correct way.
the only way. Yeah,
And that's the way kind of, because I kind of had a hand in naming my nephew over here. So I take pride on that. But Neil Mohan, who's the CEO of YouTube, the video of his keynote will be in the show notes, etc. But again, the core thing to take away is that people are watching YouTube a lot more on television than on smartphones. And in this event that they did this week, one of the big things was basically they put the creators on the stage and gave them a lot of new tools, etc., to make the video creation process, which can be fairly tedious and onerous because we do this weekly show. We know how much
yeah,
work that is involved with video and editing and so on. And they are putting Gemini and AI into these things. And so that's good. That's good to see. So a lot of the things that came out of that were more on the creator side, the stuff that you guys end up watching, we all too, as YouTube fans, etc. But I thought it was a good overall event with some interesting takeaways. Again, we'll have our write ups and all that stuff on the show notes, but very notable event in terms of where media is right now, and especially in the hands of the young. Speaking of the young, what
yeah.
do you think?
Yeah, the one thing that kind of stuck out to me. Obviously, there was a lot of debate going on as to how, and we've discussed this a bit on the show. What role does AI play in content and content creation with things like creative mediums, whether it's film or in this form, shorter form videos. And yeah, it's good to see that they leaned in. I'm very happy that they got creators on stage to actually show this. I know not only is that obviously a rehearsed thing, but it just helps people ease into knowing that these tools are being used and they're being trusted by people who they view. So just from like a presentation point of view, that stuck out to me. The features that they announced, can't wait to get them in hand and try it out. One thing that did stick out was some of the product related stuff that they talked about, where if you're discussing a product in a video, AI will help you to kind of link that product, almost like a QUC, but on YouTube. So that was kind of an interesting parallel, I guess, to what used to exist on cable television, obviously with channels like QUC and whatnot. But yeah, it's great. I think from a creation standpoint, I mean, we've seen it even in the process of doing the show, which we haven't talked about much, but we use Riverside as our main software to record and edit these videos, and it does a relatively good job. And the AI features that it has to help cut out background noise and help fill in spaces, but it even does things like generate shorts for us that we're able to post on places like YouTube. And it would be great if obviously there's a big market for this. If YouTube's able to build out using its creator studio, Riverside competitor, obviously they have the compute and they have the engineers, I'm sure, to kind of work on this. And I'm sure they are already internally. But that's where I can kind of see these natural next steps going from a creator point of view rather than a consumer point of view.
No, I agree. I think YouTube is doing more for creators, but I think they could be doing a lot more. You mentioned Riverside as an example when we started to do this, and we're not super advanced video creators or anything like that. We just wanted to get something up there and get an opportunity to talk to people. But when I started mucking around with it, then you joined the effort, and we did this together. But it was more you than me. I was startled how much effort it took to do the basic kind of stuff we're doing right now without a third party piece of software called Riverside. And there are several other competitors to that. And some of the base functionality should be already in YouTube, and they haven't bothered to do it, as an example, right? Technically, many of you, would be surprised and maybe don't care. I mean, to basically, you can upload a video, but to do something like this, as simple as this, where two people are talking into a microphone and a camera, you need third party software to do that. And the base element of that should be built in to YouTube so as to lower the floor in terms of the complexity of what is required. And it's actually one of the things that TikTok showed very quickly. And that's one of the reasons why TikTok became TikTok in the US and everywhere else outside China, is because they made it dead simple to do 30-second, 60-second videos, from soup to nuts. And then they, provided a lot of, music licensing. They took that extra mile. And YouTube, as wonderful as Neil has done a job of running this, they could do a lot more. So I would exhort them to be focused on that, especially since TikTok is going to be most likely become a US company in the US TikTok version. The current rumblings are that two financial investors, Reese and Norwitz and Silver Lake, maybe other investors, essentially those two financial investors, along with Oracle, would essentially own 80% of the US TikTok. And they're apparently rebuilding the algorithms that TikTok uses from scratch that will have licensed technology from TikTok China, and there'll be some arrangements to share that technology, which is all goodness for the 150, 200 million users of TikTok in the US. And I bring it all up because we need a healthy video ecosystem, and we need AI to help make the task of doing basic production so much easier. I'll throw in one more issue, like thumbnails. Every video you watch on how to do a YouTube channel, they always say 80% of the effort that you need to focus on is the thumbnail on your show. You and I, we barely have a barely adequate thumbnail on our stuff, and I'm like, oh my god, if we were really focusing on views, we would need to do that. But then you look at TikTok, YouTube itself; they give you zero help on creating the thumbnails. Zero. I mean, yeah, a couple of things you can upload something from, but it's like, why? When you have this global opportunity and a platform, and you're in the platform business. I'm sorry, YouTube. This is coming from admiration, not a rant. But please just focus on this, because that's what is really needed, especially in a world of AI where the amount of content people can create and then do it without the tedium of daily production. If you're helping us lower that, it's a good thing, and it's an overall market expanding thing, and be an example on that. Because by the way, Meta sure isn't doing it as well, and TikTok, who knows how it'll be managed? Who will manage it once it comes here? But we need more competition on this kind of stuff than not, and AI is a huge tailwind. So please run with that ball. In addition to focusing on the top creators and the top, Mr. Beast of the world that have ungodly numbers of views and so on. You've got to focus on the edge cases. You've got to focus on the democratization of this. Just a additional editorial comment on AI ramblings. Okay.
Good.
So that takes us off the main topic of the week to our watch and read of the week. Neil, you have a good one.
Yeah, I can go and kick it off. It's an article from The Information, and it's something again that's near and dear given the current phase I'm in. We're kind of exploring next steps out of college and figuring out, industry wise where I want to fit into the puzzle here. We discussed it a bit last week, the whole upside and downside of joining a big company or a small company a couple episodes ago. But the article is titled How Anthropic and OpenAI Are Developing AI Coworkers. And it's a pretty good in-depth article that kind of explains how a lot of these leading AI companies are teaching AIs to use major workplace apps through real world practice. So they've engineered these things and poured billions of dollars into infrastructure for what they're calling reinforcement learning gyms, which essentially can allow these AIs to repeatedly practice business workflows through a simulation, and in turn, kind of shift away from chatbots. This is something I talked about a while ago, and I'd written about in one of my articles that I had done on Substack. But it's a shift away from chat interfaces into more integrated experiences from a UI UX design point of view, and how these AI models are leveraged. And this is exactly that. So rather than just being a chat interface that you're able to interact with and ask questions to, it's hopefully trending with a lot of these agentic workflows that have been popping up in the last couple of months and will continue to pop up. Hopefully there'll be more of an area for work to be passed off completely autonomously to some of these agents as coworkers, as they're being called here, and get real value out of. So it's a great piece. I encourage everyone to go and take a look at it.
No, I love it. I enjoyed the piece, so thank you for suggesting that. Again, I will add a little bit of editorial to this element as well. I think the big LLM companies, especially OpenAI and Anthropic, are doing their users a disservice by talking about these things. Again, number one, in humanized terms, that they're coworkers. These are just tools right now. And I wanted to emphasize that, because done a lot of work on LLM AI technologies on a bottom-up basis, etc. And it is a long ways away before AIs can help us become doctors, because this is all in the air right now. The AIs will be doctors, AIs will be lawyers, AIs will be professors. Long ways. I'm talking years, and I will bet a bottle of inexpensive wine to anybody who wants to take the other side of that, just because wine is fun, and it's more the conversation than the drinking. But I'm just saying, this business of coworkers and anthropomorphizing of AI is utterly unnecessary. People are already going to be buying it and using it. Yes, AI dramatically helps augment us, the human capabilities, etc. Jan LeCun, one of the three godfathers of the internet, has goes on and we can put up his video in the thing as well. He points out that our best GPT type of AIs today have less processing than a 4-year-old, and probably are less capable than in the intelligence of your dog or cat. We are so far away. So don't oversell this business. And the reason this is important is because major investors that I talk to, the ones that don't spend huge amounts of time in the weeds of this, are believing that. And it's part of the reason why everyone is so willing to invest. Yes, there is scaling. Yes, the scaling will work for the most part as you add more compute, but there are a lot of friction points here. And so I just wanted to highlight this business of the coworkers language and just say instead they're amazing tools. Now it's like
Yeah.
when we got spreadsheets for the first time in 78, 79 on VisiCalc and then 85 in Excel. It allowed barbarians at the gate. It allowed the creation of LBO firms because young 20 somethings could create spreadsheets over 24 cycles at the major investment banks and investment firms and could put gazillion-dollar bids on entire companies because they could do the calculations. But we didn't call those things accountants, those spreadsheets. We call them tools with macros. And that's where we are. And that's what we will be for a while. So I just wanted to, again, I guess I'm in a little bit of a
No, it's
editorial
good.
mood today. So I
It's
just
good.
wanted to emphasize that. In terms of my read of the week, I put up an article which I thought was, it was in The Economist, and it said the rise of AI. We just talked about how OpenAI is being used for lots of things and so on. The most interesting thing about AI to me is that it's not just a chatbot. I said it'll be hundreds and thousands of applications. This article shows that it's actually hundreds of thousands of users. And this article, basically, it's a handful of wine companies, some of them in Europe, who started to use open source software to basically take the key ingredients and create their own models to recommend flavors of wine that would be interesting in terms of what kind of grapes and so on. And they did it with wine and beer. And the beer was interesting because they found almost almost a new almost every one of the new recipes for the beers they came up with, people loved, and they started to sell more of that. And so it's an edge case for AI that we don't normally think about. And it's an article to me is representative of the kinds of things these new tools will allow us to do. It goes back to my spreadsheet analogy. All of a sudden, because people can do spreadsheets and do calculations, they can do all kinds of things that never could before. This is an example of that. So that is my read of the week. I think if you like beer and wine, you'll get a smile on your face. It's the kinds of things that you're going to be able to do with AI, and the companies will be able to do in terms of new flavors. So kind of interesting. And that takes us to our obsession of the week, Neil. And I'll
Yeah.
let you kick us off on our obsession
Yeah.
or your obsession for this week.
This is something that, was an interesting development. I've started to kind of get together my productivity the last couple weeks, just being at home and working from my setup here, just trying to stay on top of everything I want to get done every day. And I'd usually just either use paper and pen to write down a to-do list every day, or I'd use Apple Notes or, reminders and stuff like that. But I decided to dip a toe back into the ocean that is Note. And it's software that we've discussed in the past. It's software that's infamous, at least in my circles, from being notoriously hard to use. There's a learning curve. It's one of those things where there's so much capability, it's sometimes overwhelming. I know people who manage their entire lives through Notion. It tells them when to eat, when to sleep, when to shower, and there's people that use it for simple things like a to-do list. But what they've recently added, or at least that I've recently started using, is some of the AI features, using a lot of the natural language that we've gotten used to through these chatbots, where you can now simply just prompt what you want done and created for you. Because in the end of the day, Notion is just essentially template software. You're able to make templates and flows of information and tracking that you want to do. But the large barrier of entry that existed before is now being lowered a bit through just being able to communicate in a natural way like we are right now, where I can just say, hey, I want to make a to-do list, have multiple phases, give me the ability to flag things and move them around based on priority. And it'll do it for you. And it does a relatively good job. It's nice because you see it working in real time and you see it moving the pieces around and thinking, which is something we've discussed in the past, being a great UI UX tool just to allow people to understand what's going on in the back end, and also, of course, buy them some time to get the work done from a compute point of view. But it's been great. As someone who's always tried to get into Notion, but ultimately has walked away from it just because it felt like an impossible task. This has made it a lot easier to use, and I'll have to keep everyone updated.
That's awesome. I'm going to bug you because I've always wanted to go up the Notion ramp. It's a very high learning curve, and I agree with that. The only one thing I'll mention, because I just upgraded, like a lot of people, my Mac and all my devices to the new 26 operating system. One thing I noticed, that message popped up that Notion, even though it was off on my Mac, was monitoring everything on my computer, which bugged me because I don't remember seeing a notification saying Notion asking me for permission. And we have talked about trust and privacy and all these other things. And again, these companies need to be mindful of this, that being upfront and being proactive, and maybe Notion is doing this and I missed it somehow. So I don't want to beat up on them unnecessarily. But I was startled by that message from my Mac OS that Notion was doing this. And then I basically, I was so upset about it. Actually, I uninstalled Notion from my machine, and now I'll, probably have to go back and maybe I'll put it on my test machines or something. Anyway, so I just thought I'd use that example of the Notion, not to pick on them, but this business of privacy is a very real thing. And any company, large, medium, small, trying to do AI stuff, just be upfront. Be open with your users. Tell them what you're doing. More often than not, they'll give you the permissions. Do not default and do this stuff in the background. Show them why this is going to help people and change their lives. Earn their business. Not take it without permission. So that's my just little op-ed. And that takes us to my obsession of the week. We talked about the Apple launch last week. This week on the 15th, Apple released all their operating systems that are available now on iPhone 26 now. They're all matching the year. They did it on our watches, on our iPads, on our Macs, on even my Vision Pro got a 26 update. So number one, that was a lot of fun thing to do. It's another mini Christmas, and this one doesn't cost money, and it supports 5, 6, 7 generations of hardware, which is a unique Apple thing. By the way, if you try and do that on the Android side, etc., forget about it. Maybe 2 or 3. Now the Samsungs of the world, every new device they come up with, they'll say, oh, we'll support it for 6 or 7 years, oh, for security updates. But it's a good thing. I know this is one thing that Apple does that is not as appreciated, and I think people take for granted. So that's number one. Number two, my obsession was reading all the reviews on all of the hardware that Apple announced the last week. They'll be shipping and available to a lot of people who order the new phones and the devices this Friday on the 19th. And most of the reviews, especially the big reviewers, I'm talking about the MKBHDs on YouTube, the Joanna Stern of the Wall Street Journal, the David Pierce of The Verge. I have a bone to pick with almost every one of their reviews. And it just bugs me a little bit, because as much as I admire these folks, they have one of the hardest jobs in the world to communicate to tens of millions, what's worthy to look at. But there is a little tendency by all of them collectively to be jaded by the improvements that these companies are working very hard on and be dismissive. So for instance, liquid glass, which is the big user experience on across all of Apple's devices, the lighter shade and so on. And almost every one of the reviewers I've mentioned, especially David Pierce, he had a big front piece, etc. It's, he called it the unbearable lightness of being. It's a riff off a 1980s movie. I get what you're trying to do there, David. What my point is, all of them basically diss the creativity in what's really going on, and they don't say that any user can basically customize it within seconds of getting this software and recalibrate the thing. If you can't see this, if you can't read that, you can tweak it. The biggest takeaway I took from iOS 26 was it was so extraordinarily customizable. I mean, there was more customization capability than the original MySpace, where you could put anything. You're too young for this, but MySpace, you could put anything on your website and jiggly this and that. You can do that with iOS 26. On your phone, you make the clock bigger, etc. Instead of focusing on that flexibility and so on, they're just harping on the same old issue of liquid glass. I can't see it. And Joanna Stern goes, "Who asked for this? Well, you guys are tech reviewers. Most of the innovations we get from tech companies, no one asked for. That's the job of the tech companies, to surprise us with innovation that we can react to, that makes our lives more interesting. Yeah, it's commercial. That may make us go buy the new version of that thing. We've done that with cars. You know, who said on cars? Why did you make cars electric? Who asked for that? Well, that's innovation. So please don't use those kinds of statements. I had a bone pick to pick with MKBHD. He was reviewing the iPhone Air, which is an amazing device in terms of thinness and all that stuff. We can do a separate review on that, on terms of my version of it. But he literally, as he's showing it, he goes, oh, Apple is also selling a custom battery pack for the iPhone Air, and that's a red flag. No, MKBHD, it's not a red flag. Everyone knows that a thinner phone that's 5.6 millimeter thick is going to have a smaller battery. It's just physics. And we are smart enough as buyers to know that. It's like saying a Porsche 911 is, with two doors, is not big enough for four people. Well, duh, we know that. Okay. And he daily drives a Porsche 911. And my point is, a thinner phone is going to have less battery. So of course they're giving you an opportunity to buy an extra battery if you want, or any other battery pack, and expand it. If you want to review it in terms of how the dang thing makes you feel as a new novel design element. Review it in any different way. I'm not saying be positive, but I'm saying be judicious with your negatives, your cons, because they are very petty. They come across as very petty. And that's my little other, I guess this episode, I've had
No,
more
it's good.
opinions on this, on
That's
my,
why
on this
that's why
stuff.
we're doing
But it
this,
was
is
an
to get
obsession.
opinions
But it's
out.
an obsession as
Yeah.
to why all of them have this underlying base of, I think they're all trying to have something unique to say, but I think some of it is coming across as a bit snarky, and it's not needed. So my 2 cents. Thank you for listening.
No, I agree. I mean, it's so easy to criticize with a lot of these things, and this is what ends up happening every time. It's usually always Apple that's at the forefront of this. Is they do something that everyone asks. No one asked for this. It used to be things like removing the headphone jack. No one even cares about the headphone jack anymore. It's
No.
stuff in hardware, stuff in software. This is another one of those things where, I mean, Steve Jobs was infamous for saying that the users don't know what they want until we
Thank
give it
you.
to them.
Thank you.
And this has always been Apple, has always been Steve Jobs. The customizability, maybe not as much Steve Jobs. I'm sure he would not have allowed it to this degree.
He would be
But
apoplectic.
that's kind of the Apple that exists right now, for better, for worse. And it's one of those things where, yeah, it's like, it's so easy to criticize these things, and that's how a lot of people get these headlines. Obviously, being reporters and reviewers, this is your bread and butter. But I think that everyone does need to take a bit of a step back and just wait. I think it's obviously, I know, first impressions are a thing, and no one's discounting that. But in the end of the day, you only see the real value of this stuff when you kind of live with it for a bit, especially with UI changes big as this.
And the one thing I'll just add to that, Neil, thank you, is, one thing, the headline on Apple this year across their watch and their phones especially was that they made the low end of both. So the iPhone 17, which is the base before you get to the Pro and the Pro Max, and the Apple Watch SE, which is before you get to the 11 series and the Ultra 3. This is 2 version of this. Both of them are so democratized this year. They have more amazing higher end features in both those things, and the prices, despite the tariffs, are still amazing. So the iPhone Watch SE, still $250, and you can, 20 bucks, $30 more for a slightly bigger size and all of that. And they added most of always on, the better chip, the most of the health features. They're all on the SE. Same thing with the iPhone 17, which is $700-800, and has always on screen. I mean, just a lot of great features, great battery life, all these things. And that's, that is the forest that is being missed for the trees of who asked for the liquid glass and the thinness of the iPhone Air and not enough battery life and all these actually, unnecessary commentary. And don't miss that, because when you compare Apple to Google's Pixel line and Samsung, and you know me, I watch all of these things religiously. I have all the devices. Those companies are not doing that. I've seen their models from this year. They don't have the best super features of their upper end models in the base level. Apple delivered that at scale, and only Apple could have done that. And I think they deserve some credit for that, and I'll stand up for it, and I'll say that is my big takeaway review of the Apple launch, is that the low end of all of their products, and by the way, even these AirPods, even the three, they upgraded these to the three, still same price, 250, but it has three times better the noise cancellation. I mean, just a lot of these features that are in these buds that are above the higher end buds from companies like Bose and everybody else that are cost 3, 4, 500 bucks. So on all three things that they announced, a week ago, they just nailed and delivered despite crazy ass geopolitics, tariffs, trade things. The ceramic shield glass that's on these phones is 2 or 3 times better than last year. And most of us, we drop our phones, crack the screen, etc. It's going to happen less because of this stuff. And by the way, those screens are created in the U.S. Tim Cook did a TV thing with Jim Cramer, with the CEO of Corning Glass, showing that that those things are made in the good old USA. So they're delivering everything they can for consumers and for the politicians, and yet we're fussing about we're going to need a battery pack for the iPhone Air. Boo hoo. Anyway, thank you again for letting me. I guess I'm now going over from review to a little bit rant territory, but
It's
it's
good.
just
It's
it's just
good.
been bugging me a little bit. Okay, so that allows us to get to closing out our show. And Neil, I've got a burning question because we ended with burning questions for each other. So, given we talked about YouTube and so on, what is and the TikTok change, etc. For me, TikTok is one of my social media, and YouTube are my social media obsessions. What is the social media service you're most addicted to? Is my question in
Yeah,
2025.
I think it would have to be TikTok also.
Okay, good,
We've discussed this in the past. It's gotten to a point where now better for worse, go to TikTok even to search for new things, to discover new things. Not only be
good,
provided things by the algorithm, which is of course very addicting, but also if I want to search for the best restaurants in a new city, it's rare that I'll go to Google or Perplexity, but I'll go to TikTok because there's the whole visual element of being recommended something, but it's also just how good their algorithm is. So hopefully, with this news of them re-engineering things for the US version, things don't go awry in terms of the algorithm, because I think that really is the main value proposition of TikTok, at least from my point of view, that a lot of people don't realize when they're using it. But yeah, I'd have to go with TikTok. I'd say TikTok, and then maybe X coming in second, just because it's just another place where a lot of the people I follow just post the most often. I think Instagram's gone down probably the most for me over time. Don't really touch Instagram as much as I used to. I think just the format is a bit outdated, but with images being at the forefront, I think text based and video based is really where it's at least as of now. Check back in a year and I might have a different view, but yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
awesome. And that leaves us at your burning question for me.
Yeah, which I think it kind of got answered before I asked it, but it was, out of all the Apple updates that have come out, in the last few days, obviously we'll get the new devices in hand hopefully soon by next episode. But all the software updates, is there one that kind of stuck out to you? First few days of using it.
No, thank you. I didn't mean to run ahead of your burning question, but so I answered one part of my answer is this democratization, that they've given a lot of great features to the base models without going up in price. But if I had to pick one on the phones, because it has all the phones have this, is the 120 hertz screens. So the ProMotion, what they call it, which is a screen that even for non-techies, if you want to use the higher speed screens, you'll see a difference versus your phones from last year and earlier. Everything just feels much faster and responsive and so on. So I think they've again democratizing that feature is a visual thing, because again, most people don't think about this. We probably on average now spend more time with our phones in a day than we spend in our beds. There was an old thing that, always you make sure you get a great mattress. You get a new mattress 7, 8 years because you sleep 7, 8 hours a day. But we're spending more time on our phones. So everyone just get the best phone you can. Don't worry about all the reviewers and this feature and that feature. Obviously, you can fuss over all of that. And today with the internet, there's gazillion opinions and great YouTube videos. It's so much better, the abundance of information. In general, the thing I would just say is that we live in a glorious age of abundance, and don't get jaded by the technology. Don't get jaded by and take these things for granted as to what's really going on. That's all generally net goodness for people. So, with that, I'd like to end episode 21. Want to thank you again, all, for joining us again for AI Ramblings. As usual, please like and subscribe, comments, feedback, always appreciated. And Neil, thank you for, again,
Thank you.
helping us put all this together. And we'll see you next week.
See you next episode. Bye.